My son thought a $3,000 suit made him untouchable. It didn't. It just made him brave enough to humiliate his own mother. Last night, at his $1 million Christmas dinner, he leaned across the table, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "This seat is for my father-in-law. Get out." Not quietly, not with shame. He said it so everyone could hear. When I didn't move fast enough, he repeated it, slower this time, like I was confused or hard of hearing. I stood up, my knees gave out, and I hit the marble floor while his friends laughed into their wine glasses. My purse spilled open. Coupons. A folded photo of him as a child. No one helped me. And that's when my son made the biggest mistake of his life. You expect cruelty from strangers. You brace for it from enemies. But when it comes from the child you raised with your own body and breath, it lands differently. It doesn't sting, it sinks. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and walked out into the cold like I was leaving someone else's house. Because that's what it had become. What Julian didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was who paid for the confidence he was wearing. Who signed the checks that built the life he was so desperate to protect. He thought I was small. He thought I was harmless. That belief cost him everything. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was clear. I didn't raise my voice at dinner because I didn't need to. I had already decided. Before the sun came up, my son would lose his house, his job, his access to money. By the time he finished his morning coffee, the life he chose over his own mother would be gone. Not through shouting, not through revenge fueled by rage, through signatures. If this happened to you, if the people you trusted most turned on you without warning, wouldn't you want to see it coming? Subscribe now, because these moments don't announce themselves. They arrive dressed as family dinners and polite smiles. And if you're choosing not to subscribe, say why in the comments. Tell me what makes you think you'd be ready when it's your turn. Julian likes to tell people he came from nothing. What he leaves out is who stood in that nothing with him. I was 26 when I held him for the first time in a cramped Chicago hospital room. No husband, no safety net, just a baby with a strong grip and lungs that worked just fine. I remember thinking, you and me, that's it now. And it was. There were years when the silence in our apartment felt louder than any argument. Years when the heat went out in winter and we slept in coats. Years when I learned how to stretch $1 so thin it felt transparent. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for sympathy. I told myself I was building something. Not comfort, character. Not luxury, options. Julian grew up watching me tie my shoes for double shifts, watching me rub my ankles at night, watching me set my alarm even when I hadn't slept. He learned early that effort didn't come with applause. At least, that's what I believed. The year Julian went to prom, he came home with a brochure for tuxedo rentals. He tried to act casual about it, like it didn't matter. But it mattered to me. All the boys at his school came from families who treated those things like pocket change. I refused to let my son feel smaller than them. So I told him not to worry. I told him I'd handle it. What I didn't tell him was that the money came from my wedding ring. The one thing I'd kept from a marriage that ended too early and too quietly. I walked into a pawn shop downtown, slid it across the counter, and sat in my car afterward with my hands on the steering wheel until my chest stopped tightening. When Julian came down the stairs in that tux, smiling like he belonged anywhere he stood, I told him I'd lost the ring down the sink. He laughed and said, "You're always losing things, Mom." He was right. I was losing parts of myself, and calling it parenting. Julian didn't go to the neighborhood schools. I made sure of that. I worked overtime, holidays, weekends, any shift they'd give me, so he could sit in classrooms where expectations were higher and excuses weren't tolerated. Those schools taught him how to speak, how to dress, how to look people in the eye and never blink first. What they didn't teach him was gratitude. I watched him change slowly, not into someone cruel, at least not yet, but into someone certain. Certain that his place in the world was earned entirely by his own hands. When teachers praised him, he nodded like it was expected. When classmates struggled, he grew impatient. I told myself, this was confidence. I told myself this was preparation. I didn't see the warning signs because I was too busy keeping the machine running. There are questions parents avoid because they're afraid of the answers. I never asked Julian whether he respected me. I never asked whether he saw my sacrifices or just the results. I assumed love filled in the gaps. Looking back, I realize I trained him to value outcomes over people. I taught him how to win without teaching him when to stop. And the world rewarded that. Scholarships, internships, connections. Every success reinforced the idea that progress justified everything behind it. Even me. When Julian married Victoria, people congratulated me on doing something right. They said I should be proud, and I was. But pride is dangerous when it blinds you. I believe my job was finished, that the foundation I laid would hold without supervision. That kindness, once taught, didn't need maintenance. I was wrong, because the truth is this. I didn't just raise my son. I funded his confidence. I underwrote his ambition. I paid the admission price for the rooms he now walks into without a second thought. And on Christmas night, when he asked me to stand up and disappear, I finally understood what my investment had produced. How many parents give everything and still wonder where they went wrong? Julian didn't learn confidence by accident. It was taught, carefully, intentionally, and at a cost I didn't calculate until much later. I taught him how to speak clearly and slowly, never rushing his words. I corrected his posture at the dinner table, even when that table was chipped and pushed against the wall. I showed him how to shake hands firmly, how to remember names, how to listen without interrupting. These things matter, I told him. They decide how people treat you. He absorbed it all quickly. Too quickly. By the time he was 16, he could walk into a room full of adults and hold his ground. Teachers praised his composure. Counselors told me he had presence. I smiled every time they said it. What I didn't notice was how easily presence turned into entitlement when no one pushed back. The schools Julian attended were worlds I never belonged to. Their hallways were quiet in a way that felt intentional. Their rules were firm, but selectively enforced. Children there learned early that consequences were flexible if you spoke well enough. Julian watched that closely. He learned which mistakes mattered and which could be explained away. He learned that confidence often carried more weight than honesty. He learned that authority responded faster to those who looked like they belonged. At home, I still set limits. But outside our apartment, the world kept handing him exceptions. I told myself this was opportunity. I told myself it was unfair to deny him advantages simply because I never had them. But advantages come with a price when they aren't balanced by humility. Julian stopped asking questions. He started making assumptions. And the world didn't correct him. Julian picked up a way of speaking that wasn't mine. His sentences became cleaner, flatter, more controlled. Emotion was something he kept in check, like a liability. He learned when to smile without meaning it, when to nod without agreeing, when to stay quiet and let others reveal too much. I noticed the change most when he came home for holidays. He'd correct my grammar gently, like he was doing me a favor. He'd glance at my furniture with polite indifference, like he was visiting a museum exhibit from a different life. Still, he never raised his voice, never insulted me directly. That came later. At the time, I mistook restraint for respect. Julian's career advanced quickly, faster than I expected, faster than he admitted. He told me about promotions the way some people talk about weather, inevitable, unremarkable. When I asked how he did it, he shrugged. Hard work, he said. Being prepared. Both were true. Neither was complete. He stopped mentioning the people who helped him. He stopped acknowledging timing, access, or luck. His story became cleaner with each retelling, until I barely recognized my role in it. I didn't push back. I didn't remind him. Parents don't like to compete with their children's narratives. We tell ourselves that letting them shine means stepping into the background. But background roles have a way of becoming invisible. Despite everything, I was proud. That pride kept my mouth shut more times than I care to admit. When Julian moved to Connecticut, I told myself distance was normal. When his calls shortened, I told myself he was busy. When invitations became formal, instead of warm, I told myself this was adulthood. I didn't want to be the mother who clung too tightly. I didn't want to embarrass him. So I stayed in my lane. I let him grow without friction. And in doing so, I helped create a version of my son who believed the world was a ladder, and that some people were meant to stay on the lower rungs. Looking back, I can see the moment something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with shouting or slam doors. It arrived quietly, in the way Julian started introducing me. "This is my mother," he'd say, without warmth or detail. Not a nurse. Not the woman who raised him alone. Just a fact. A label. By the time he married Victoria, the shift was complete. He didn't hide me, but he didn't include me either. I told myself this was success. I told myself this was the price of raising a son who could stand anywhere. What I didn't realize was that he had learned how to stand by stepping on what came before him. And Christmas night was when he finally showed me how easily he could do it. The invitation arrived 3 weeks before Christmas. Thick paper, heavy envelope, my name printed in a font that felt expensive to look at. Julian called the same night. "Mom, we're hosting dinner this year," he said. "It'll be formal." I understood what he meant. The drive to Greenwich took just over 2 hours, but it felt longer. The houses grew larger as I got closer, spaced far apart, hidden behind gates and trimmed hedges that looked like they were maintained daily. When I pulled into Julian's driveway, I had to sit in my car for a moment. The house was enormous. White stone, tall windows, a driveway wide enough for mistakes to disappear. I took a breath, grabbed the 2 apple pies from the back seat, and reminded myself that this was my son's home, even if it didn't feel like it. Victoria opened the door before I could knock twice. She looked at me the way people look at something unexpected that they don't want to deal with right away. Her eyes paused on my coat, then dropped to the containers in my hands. "Oh," she said, "you're early." Not hello, not come in. She stepped aside just enough for me to pass. No hug, no warmth. "My parents will be here soon," she added, adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. "Just put those in the kitchen, somewhere out of sight." I nodded and walked in. The house smelled clean in a way that didn't feel lived in. Everything matched. Everything was placed just so. The floors reflected the ceiling lights like mirrors. I set the pies on the counter and wiped my hands on a napkin I'd brought from home. No one noticed. The dining room was already set. Gold-edged plates, crystal glasses that caught the light from every angle, napkins folded into shapes I didn't recognize. Name cards rested at each place. I scanned the table slowly, looking for mine. It was there, at the very end, pressed close to the wall, where the chair would barely slide back. I didn't say anything. People who grow up with less learn early which battles draw attention and which ones don't. I had survived on silence more times than I could count. I sat where I was told to sit. From that position, I could see the entire table, but no one would have to look directly at me unless they turned their head. It was a thoughtful arrangement. The Beauforts arrived precisely on time. Sterling Beaufort entered first, filling the room without saying much. His wife followed, perfectly composed, her smile measured and distant. They greeted Victoria warmly. Julian stood taller the moment they stepped inside. Sterling shook my hand briefly, already distracted by something on his phone. "Eleanor," he said, without asking what I did or where I came from. That was enough. Conversation flowed around me, not to me. Business talk, travel, numbers that meant nothing to anyone who didn't already have enough. I nodded when appropriate, smiled when someone glanced my way. I had spent my life learning how to exist without taking up space. This was familiar ground. What I wasn't prepared for was how comfortable my son looked watching it happen. Julian didn't check on me once. He laughed easily with Sterling. He poured wine without asking if I wanted any. He spoke about the house like it was a natural extension of who he'd always been. Victoria corrected me once when I mentioned Chicago. "We say the city," she said lightly. I smiled and nodded. Inside, something tightened. I had raised my son to move confidently through rooms like this. I hadn't raised him to forget who was standing quietly at the edge of them. Still, I stayed quiet. Dinner hadn't started yet. I told myself it would pass. Then the assistant arrived unexpectedly. Another place setting was needed. I saw the calculation happen in Julian's eyes before anyone spoke. I watched him scan the table, measuring light, space, importance. His gaze landed on me. In that moment, I understood exactly where I ranked. Not as his mother, not as family, as an inconvenience. And when he opened his mouth to speak, I knew Christmas dinner was about to become something none of them would ever forget. Betrayal never looks dangerous until it costs you everything. Dinner began with polite motion. Plates were served in careful order. Wine was poured without spills. Sterling spoke about numbers that made everyone nod, even when no one asked questions. I ate slowly. I wasn't hungry. Then the assistant cleared her throat. "I'm so sorry," she said, standing near the doorway. "I didn't realize I was supposed to be here tonight. Julian asked me to bring the documents." Sterling looked up. Victoria stiffened. Julian froze. One extra person. One missing chair. No one moved. I noticed how quickly silence settles when power is deciding what to do next. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Glasses hovered in midair. Julian scanned the table again. This time, he didn't hesitate. "Mom," Julian said, not looking at me at first. "There's a problem." I looked up. "What kind of problem?" He exhaled sharply, like I was making things difficult. "There aren't enough seats. Sterling needs this one." He finally met my eyes then. There was no confusion in them. No embarrassment. Just urgency. "This spot has the best light," he added. "He needs to review the paperwork." I glanced around the room. There were no spare chairs. No offers to adjust. No movement from anyone else. "Where should I go?" I asked. Julian's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't do this." "Do what?" "Make it awkward." Sterling shifted slightly, already waiting. Julian leaned closer, his voice louder now. "This seat isn't yours. It's for my father-in-law. Get out." The words landed hard. Clean. Public. I didn't understand at first. My body moved slower than my mind. "Julian," I said quietly, "I'm already sitting." His face flushed. "That's the problem." Someone laughed. A short sound, cut off too late. I pushed my chair back. My foot caught the edge of the rug. My balance went before I could correct it. I went down hard. The sound of my body hitting the floor echoed louder than any voice in the room. Pain shot up my side, sharp and sudden. My purse tipped over. Its contents scattered across the floor. Coupons, lip balm, a folded photo of Julian at 3 years old, missing his front teeth. No one reached for me. Victoria let out a breath that sounded irritated. Sterling stepped forward, careful not to touch me, and took the chair. Julian didn't move. I looked up at my son from the floor and waited for his hand. It never came. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else returned to their plate. Conversation restarted, quieter now, like the room had agreed to pretend nothing happened. I gathered my things slowly. My fingers shook, but I kept them steady. I placed the photo back in my purse and stood up on my own. Julian finally spoke. "Mom, maybe you should just go home." I nodded. Not because I agreed, because there was nothing left to say. I didn't look at anyone as I walked out. I didn't need to. The room had already made its decision. The cold outside hit me all at once. My breath caught in my throat as I reached my car. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, and felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. I had spent 32 years protecting my son from discomfort, from consequence, from ever seeing me as anything but supportive. In one sentence, he had undone all of that. He had chosen status over blood, approval over loyalty, appearance over decency, and he had done it without hesitation. I sat in my car and closed the door gently. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror. For the first time that night, I smiled. I didn't cry on the drive home. I thought about every check I'd signed, every door I'd opened, every excuse I'd made for him. And I made a promise to myself. By morning, The world Julian built to impress other people would be gone. Not because I hated him, because he had shown me exactly who he was willing to discard. And I was done being the easiest thing to step over. Was Julian wrong? Or was he protecting his future? The streets of Greenwich were quiet. Snow had fallen lightly, covering the driveways and hedges with a thin, immaculate layer of white. The neighborhood lights reflected off the snow, glimmering like candles in the dark. But I didn't see beauty. I saw clarity. I walked to my car slowly, carrying my purse and the remaining pride I had left. Each step pressed my boots into the snow, leaving temporary marks that the wind would soon erase. In that silence, I realized the depth of what had happened. Julian didn't just push me aside at dinner. He declared where I belonged in his life. And he did it in front of the very people I had worked to impress, the people I thought I had trained him to navigate with grace. I didn't yell. I didn't call his name. I didn't cry. I simply accepted the truth. As I drove back to my small Chicago cottage, the cold air from the vents couldn't match the fire building inside me. Anger rose in steady, controlled waves, not chaotic, not loud, but precise, focused. 32 years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and tireless effort had been ignored at a table that wasn't mine. The realization hit me. Julian had learned every lesson I had taught him, except the one about respect. Yet in that anger, I found strategy. I remembered every document I had kept, every secret trust and property, every quiet advantage I had never revealed. If he believed that humility was a weakness, I would show him strength. If he believed my presence was optional, I would remind him that absence can be powerful. If he believed money could make him untouchable, I would prove that legacy, not luxury, is what builds a life that lasts. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the frost on my car mirrors reflected more than the night sky. They reflected the path I had decided to take, and it would be deliberate. I thought about the years it had taken to build him, the sacrifices that never made the headlines, the wedding ring I'd sold to afford a prom tuxedo, the double shifts at the hospital while my body ached and my eyes burned, the night I cried in a pawn shop parking lot because the money had to be spent on him, not me. I thought about the times I had told myself that love was enough, that devotion was its own reward, and I realized that love had limits. It could guide, it could nurture, but it could not replace accountability. It could forgive, but it could not protect a son who chose appearances over family. The world had handed him privilege, but it hadn't taught him gratitude. I had given him more than anyone else could, and he had dismissed it. It wasn't enough for him to succeed. He needed to understand what that success cost, and who paid the price. I parked in front of my cottage and stepped out. The snow crunched under my boots, the air sharp enough to wake every sense. The wind bit at my cheeks, but it didn't matter. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and old books. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the quiet wrap around me. It was the kind of silence that encourages thought, planning, and resolve. I thought about Julian asleep in a house he considered his own. I imagined him unaware that the tables were about to turn, that his carefully constructed image would meet consequences he hadn't considered. I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The apple pies waited in the fridge, a small reminder that I had tried to give comfort even when the world had rejected it. Tonight, there would be no action. Tonight, I would wait. But by morning, everything would begin to shift. The morning was cold, but it carried a clarity that only long-suppressed power can provide. I opened the old closet where I kept the trunk that had belonged to Silas. Its leather was worn, edges frayed, but inside, everything I needed lay organized and intact. Property deeds, trust documents, account numbers, letters detailing every detail of his intentions. Silas had built this carefully. He had left instructions not for Julian, Not for Victoria, not for the Beauforts, but for me, the woman who had raised him alone. He had trusted that I would know when the time was right to reveal the truth. The trust wasn't small. It controlled several downtown Chicago properties, a series of offshore accounts, and a controlling share in Beaufort Global itself. Julian had been ignorant of it for years. I had let him live in the illusion that success was all his own. But his behavior last night changed everything. For 32 years, I had lived modestly. A nurse's salary, occasional tips, careful budgeting. My possessions were limited, my home small. All by design. Julian believed this reflected our circumstances, not knowing the truth. Every strategic move, every asset, every key to a future he thought he had earned, had been in my hands all along. He had been blind to my influence, blind to the safety net I had built, blind to the leverage I wielded. And now, after last night, he had learned the hard way what it meant to underestimate me. I sat at my desk, reviewing every deed and account, each property, each legal instruction, each financial instrument. Each one gave me the ability to shape outcomes, reversal, exposure, or reclamation. Silas had been precise. Julian was not to touch a cent until he understood family over finance. The lesson was mine to administer, and I had waited, patiently, carefully, waiting for the moment when he would need to understand humility and respect before it was too late. The irony was exquisite. Julian had spent decades climbing social ladders, attending private schools, hosting elegant dinners, learning the etiquette of power, all while I held the ultimate power and had chosen not to wield it, until now. By mid-morning, I made my decisions. This was no longer about emotional satisfaction. This was about ensuring consequences matched the lesson. I contacted my lawyer, Arthur, with instructions for immediate action. Letters were to be drafted, properties flagged, accounts monitored. The Beaufort Global Board would be notified. Everything would move quietly, deliberately, but nothing could stop the change. Julian had shown me who he truly was. He had chosen optics over family, status over decency, appearance over gratitude. And for the first time in decades, I would let my son experience the consequences of ignoring the person who had given him everything. I took a deep breath and reflected on what Julian would see when he realized the truth. The silent majority shareholder of the very company he aimed to impress. The hidden owner of the house he thought he could claim as his own. The woman who had funded, nurtured, and protected his life, while he flaunted independence. By the time he would wake, the illusions of his superiority would crack. The control he believed he had was mine to redirect. The comfort he assumed came from skill and inheritance alone would be replaced with clarity, accountability, and respect. Lessons he could no longer ignore. Most people hide power. Subscribe so you recognize it before it's too late. I dialed Arthur's number at 11:45 p.m. The sound of the phone connecting was louder than anything in my quiet house. "Eleanor," he said, rasped and half asleep. "Everything okay?" "It's late." "Arthur," I replied calmly, "it's time. The trust is open, and I want immediate action." His silence was brief, but telling. He understood exactly what I meant. "Are you sure? Once we start, there's no turning back," he warned. "I've been sure for 32 years, I said. "Julian needs to understand consequences. Do as instructed. The Beaufort acquisition is to be halted immediately. All assets flagged. All board members notified." The words felt clean, efficient, like opening a door to a room he thought was locked. Arthur sighed. "Very well. I'll begin the process immediately." I hung up and allowed myself a moment to savor the calm before the storm. By the time Julian woke, his world would no longer resemble the one he had built with arrogance and ignorance. I had spent years ensuring every asset, account, and document was in my control. Now, it was time to deploy them strategically. Offshore accounts. Checked. Chicago properties. Flagged for transfer. Trust deeds. Activated. Every move was deliberate, like a chess master positioning pawns, knights, and rooks. Julian's life, which had seemed so untouchable, was about to feel the weight of structure, discipline, and oversight. Each email sent to banks, trustees, and board members was calculated to create maximum effect with minimal fuss. There was no chaos. There was no drama, only inevitable consequences. I smiled, picturing the moment Julian would see the first domino fall. One of the first moves was the house. Julian's claim to the Greenwich estate was contingent on approvals he could never meet. The deed, long held by the Vance Trust, was flagged for transfer overnight. He believed ownership was his. He had shown no gratitude. He had shown no respect. By morning, the house would no longer belong to him. Victoria would face the reality that opulence cannot hide irresponsibility, and Julian would confront the uncomfortable truth that the person he had dismissed could dismantle the entire illusion with a few well-placed decisions. The Beaufort acquisition, carefully touted as the deal of the season, was dependent on my silence. Julian had believed that Sterling's confidence was enough to secure the merger. He had believed that his work, charm, and presence alone could close the deal. I didn't call Sterling. I didn't make a scene. I simply instructed Arthur to notify the board and freeze the necessary holdings. By morning, the acquisition would be halted, stocks frozen, accounts suspended. Sterling would scramble for explanations. Julian would wake to the collapse of what he had thought unstoppable. Each action reinforced the lesson. Status cannot replace humility. Power without accountability is fleeting. Respect cannot be taken. It must be given. I moved with precision, watching each domino prepare to fall. Every property transfer, every bank notification, every corporate alert reinforced the truth Julian had ignored. The foundations of life are built by the hands that guide, protect, and sacrifice. By the end of the 12-hour period, Julian would face the stark contrast between appearance and reality, between arrogance and accountability, between the illusion he had chased and the life he had been given by someone who actually cared. As the night turned into early morning, I reviewed every confirmation email, every property transfer, every alert from Arthur. It was done. The chessboard was set. Every move anticipated, every piece aligned, every consequence inevitable. I sat back in my chair, poured a cup of tea, and let the satisfaction settle quietly around me. Not vengeance, not spite, just justice. When Julian woke, he would confront a world where comfort and privilege were replaced by clarity and accountability. For the first time in 32 years, he would see exactly what it means to underestimate someone who has always been in control. I woke to quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier after a night of careful planning. The house smelled of brewing coffee and faint wood smoke, the routine sounds of morning masking the chaos about to unfold elsewhere. I poured myself a cup of tea and picked up my phone. The screen glowed with missed calls and messages, but I didn't flinch. I already knew the moment Julian would see. 102 missed calls, 48 text messages, 14 voicemails. From him, from Victoria, from Sterling Beaufort. Each notification was a pulse, a signal that the world Julian thought he controlled was shifting. I scrolled through the first messages. Julian's tone shifted rapidly. 6:15 a.m. Mom, why did I just get a notification that our home's deed has been flagged? Call me. 6:30 a.m. Mom, pick up. Sterling's board is saying the merger is dead. Who is Silas Vance? Why is that name on the legal documents? 6:45 a.m. Eleanor, pick up. Accounts frozen. Victoria is hysterical. What did you do? I sipped my tea, letting the panic settle in as it would. Julian had no idea the extent of what had been set into motion. Every property transfer, every account alert, every freeze had been executed with quiet precision. I opened the security feed I had installed months ago in the Greenwich house. The scene confirmed my expectations. Julian pacing the marble floors like a man lost at sea. Victoria clutching papers, her face streaked with tears. Sterling sitting rigidly in the chair Julian had stolen from his mother, staring at a tablet as his company's pre-market valuations dropped. The merger of the season was crumbling before their eyes, and there was no one to catch them. I allowed myself a quiet smile. It was remarkable how quickly control can slip from the confident and into the hands of someone who had been underestimated for decades. By 7:30 a.m., Julian's messages had escalated from confusion to desperation. "Mom, please, something is happening. They're saying we have 48 hours to vacate the house. Tell me you know these people. Tell me you can fix this." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to feel the tension, to understand that consequences follow choices. Finally, I answered. "Julian," I said calmly, "I do know them. In fact, I pay their retainer." The silence on the other end was palpable, the kind that carries understanding before words are spoken. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, thin, cracked, almost breathless. "I've always managed the assets you thought you had access to. The house, the accounts, the trust, they are under my direction. Your world is exactly where I want it. You have 48 hours to adjust." I could hear Victoria in the background, sobbing quietly, pointing at screens and papers as Julian tried to reconcile reality with expectation. The stocks, the accounts, the house, the merger, each one depended on me, quietly held, silently controlled. He had never considered that the woman he dismissed could dictate the fate of all these things. By 8 a.m., the panic had fully taken hold. Julian was no longer a man in control. He was a son, confronted with the consequences of underestimating the person who had given him everything. I poured another cup of tea and watched. Calm, composed, unshaken. Justice was unfolding exactly as it should. If you were Julian, how would you react to losing everything overnight? My phone rang. "Julian," I had let the first round of panic settle. Now it was time to speak. "Mom." His voice trembled, thin and brittle. "Something's happening. They're saying we have 48 hours to vacate the house. Tell me you know who these people are. Tell me you can fix this." I took a slow breath, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Calm, measured, authoritative, I had waited for this moment. "I do know them, Julian," I said softly. "In fact, I pay their retainer." The silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear the disbelief rattling through him. What are you talking about?" His voice was faint, almost desperate. "You've relied on appearances for too long," I said. "I've been the silent majority stakeholder, the guardian of the assets, and the controller of everything you thought you had. Everything you believed was yours, was never yours to begin with." Julian gasped. "But you're just a nurse. How did you?" I smiled faintly. 32 years of quiet control. Every property, every account, every trust deed, managed from the shadows. And last night, you reminded me why it needed to be activated. His tone shifted from disbelief to fear. "Mom, please, this isn't fair. Victoria, the house, the business. Fair has nothing to do with it," I interrupted. "You dismissed me at a table where I gave you life, opportunity, and guidance. You prioritized optics over gratitude, status over respect, appearance over substance, and now you are seeing the results." For the first time, he understood the weight of choices and the power I had always held. "You still don't understand," I continued. "The Greenwich house, it was under my control all along. You assumed ownership. Yet the deed, the trust, and the right to occupy it were mine to direct. You have 48 hours to adjust to reality. Julian's breathing grew rapid, almost panicked. I don't understand. This can't be legal. Call the lawyers, please. I've already spoken to them. They know exactly what to do, I said. And before you ask, yes, Sterling's merger is stalled. The accounts are frozen. Your world is precisely where it should be. There was silence, broken only by the muffled sobs of Victoria in the background. Julian, stripped of bravado, could finally comprehend the consequences of underestimating me. I leaned back in my chair, letting my words sink in. I didn't do this out of revenge, Julian. I did this to teach accountability. Respect isn't optional. Power isn't a toy. Legacy isn't inherited by arrogance. His voice cracked. Mom, please. I didn't mean to. You meant every word when you told me to get out of that chair, I said firmly. You chose optics over family. You chose appearance over gratitude. And now, the lesson is unavoidable. Julian's desperation was palpable even through the phone. He was learning too late that life cannot be dictated by entitlement alone. Julian, I said softly, you may not like this, but this is the reality. You will experience the consequences of your actions. The assets, the house, the accounts, they are under my direction. Compliance is the only way forward. He whispered, almost inaudibly, Mom, I understand. Good, I replied. Now take a deep breath. Begin to make amends. You have a window to adjust, to reflect, and to show me that respect and accountability can exist alongside ambition. Fail, and the consequences will extend further. Succeed, and perhaps one day you will earn what you tried to claim without merit. I ended the call, calm, composed, and entirely in control. Julian had learned a truth that could not be unlearned. The person who raises, protects, and sacrifices can wield power beyond expectation. Would you have faced your parents' authority or fought it like Julian? Comment below. By late morning, the quiet of my cottage was interrupted by tires crunching on gravel. I looked up through the window. Julian, disheveled, face flushed, suit wrinkled, storming toward the door. Victoria followed, her designer coat, doing little to hide the panic in her eyes. They knocked, though knocking seemed almost ceremonial. Julian's desperation was impossible to disguise. I opened the door, calm, composed, tea still in hand. Good morning, I said, as though greeting someone to a casual visit. You look tired. Julian's voice rose, thick with fear and frustration. Mom, we need to talk. You can't do this. The house, the accounts, everything is frozen. I leaned against the doorframe, observing him as I had observed countless patients and colleagues over the years. I can do this because it was never yours to claim without understanding respect, humility, and accountability, I replied. Victoria stepped forward, eyes wide, voice trembling. Eleanor, please. The country club, the house, you can't just... I can, I said firmly, and I did. The foundation for every privilege you assumed was based on compliance and consideration. You ignored that. She looked around, realizing the modest comfort of my home contrasted sharply with the Greenwich estate she had flaunted. She faltered, her defenses crumbling. Julian's attempts to mediate failed. They were both forced to see the weight of their choices. Entitlement cannot protect against strategic consequences. I walked to my desk and retrieved the paperwork I had prepared overnight. A single sheet of paper held the power to define their next decade. You will owe nothing to the bank anymore, I said, but you will owe me. Every day you fail to comply with the terms I've set will be recorded and enforced. I handed Julian the lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in the old neighborhood, the very area I had worked 3 jobs to leave when raising him. "You're going back to where we started," I said, "and the Greenwich house will be converted into a foundation for single mothers. Your cars will be repossessed by the trust. If you want to keep your law license, you'll work pro bono for my foundation for the next 3 years, miss a single day, and the full audit of your accounting at Beaufort Global will be released." Julian looked at the paper as though seeing a foreign language. His hands shook. "You're ruining me," he whispered. "No," I said firmly. "I'm giving you the chance I never had. Earn it, or learn the lesson." They lingered at the door, unsure whether to flee or beg. The truth had settled over them like an unavoidable weight. Julian glanced at Victoria, then back at me, realizing that every arrogance, every entitlement, every dismissal of humility had led them here. "You've underestimated me for decades," I said softly. "And for decades, I let you believe you were the master of your fate. Last night, that illusion ended. Today, you begin to understand the value of respect, accountability, and restraint." The silence stretched long, broken only by Julian's labored breathing and Victoria's quiet sobs. They understood fully. The rules had changed, and the game was no longer theirs to control. Would you forgive, or let the lesson finish? Comment your choice below. Julian and Victoria lingered uneasily, the weight of the previous day's revelations still pressing down on them. I remained calm, seated at my small wooden table, tea in hand. The simplicity of the setting stood in stark contrast to the grandeur of the life they had thought they owned. "Listen carefully," I said. "The foundation will take the Greenwich estate, and it will support single mothers and families who deserve opportunity. The assets you thought were yours are now under strict terms. Compliance is mandatory. Respect and accountability are not negotiable." Julian's jaw tightened. Victoria's hands twisted nervously. They understood the boundaries had been drawn. "You will work for my foundation," I continued. "Pro bono. Every day. No exceptions. This is not punishment for punishment's sake. It is an opportunity to see the value of contribution beyond personal gain." Julian's voice cracked. "Mom, 3 years." "Yes," I said unwavering. "You will meet expectations, learn discipline, and understand the difference between inheritance and effort. Your previous privilege does not excuse your behavior. This is your path to redemption, if you choose to walk it." Victoria, silent until now, glanced at Julian, her face reflecting realization. Their lives would no longer run on entitlement. They would run on accountability and consistent action. "I will not accept an apology," I added firmly. "Not yet. Words cannot erase years of dismissal, arrogance, and disrespect. What is required now is action, accountability, compliance, and effort will determine whether you may someday earn trust and opportunity again." Julian's shoulders slumped. He had always believed status and charm could cover mistakes. Now he faced the reality that deeds, consistency, and integrity were the only measures of true worth. "You will earn your seat at the table," I said, gesturing to the small dining table where we now shared a quiet space. "Not with money, not with status, not with appearances. You will earn it with humility, responsibility, and respect. If you fail, the lessons continue and the consequences are permanent. If you succeed, only then may you reclaim what you once assumed was yours." The weight of those words hung in the air, undeniable and immovable. They had been given a chance. Yes, but the conditions were clear. I had restored order, justice, and clarity. Would you accept these terms, or reject them and face full consequences? Comment below. After Julian and Victoria left, I returned to my small wooden table in the cottage kitchen. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, gentle and unassuming. No marble floors, no chandeliers, no eyes watching every move. just quiet, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing the right order had been restored. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the 2 apple pies I had brought to Greenwich, the ones Victoria had deemed out of sight. I placed one on the table, letting the smell of cinnamon and baked apples fill the room. There was a satisfaction in this simplicity, a reminder that the most enduring joys don't come from wealth or status, but from care, patience, and effort. These pies had been baked with love, not for show. And for the first time in decades, I could enjoy one without compromise. I cut a generous slice, savoring the warmth and the sweetness. Each bite was a reminder of every choice I had made. Every shift worked, every sacrifice endured, every quiet act of guidance for Julian. The consequences he faced were necessary, harsh though they were, but they were fair. The quiet of the cottage wrapped around me. I thought about the lessons imparted, not through words alone, but through consequences, structure, and accountability. Life had a way of teaching even the most entitled, even those who believed they could escape responsibility. I sat there, the warmth of the pie on my tongue, feeling a sense of justice that money could never buy. Julian and Victoria had learned what it meant to face reality, and I had ensured that their lessons were unforgettable. For all of us, life often hands moments that reveal character, test resolve, and measure respect. The sweetest satisfaction comes not from revenge, but from the restoration of balance and the recognition that actions, good or bad, always have consequences. If justice tasted this sweet, would you have done the same? Pause for a moment, think about it, and if your answer is yes, share it in the comments. Reflect, engage, and let others consider how respect, accountability, and integrity shape the choices we make. If justice tasted this sweet, would you have done the same?